Hi, welcome to Women's Health Matters podcast. And on this podcast, we look at all areas of women's health, be it they need help with their hormones, help financially, help with an abusive relationship, whatever area is needed, help with diet, nutrition, exercise, pelvic floor. I'm just trying to think of some of the guests that we've had in here. We also had a guest who talked lots about Reiki and self-healing and self-love. These are all really important parts of being you and you feeling like you again. And today I'm joined by an amazing lady, Catherine, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell us about what she does and how she ended up doing what she does, actually. So welcome, Catherine. Thank you for coming on this podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome, Lucy. Thank you so much for inviting me along. Yes, Catherine Ferrin, Silver Sister Productions is the business that I started just over 4 years ago. Um, so I'll talk to you about what Silver Sister is when I tell you how I got there. Um, Silver Sister Productions was born out of my passion for supporting women, in particular women who have suffered domestic or sexual violence. And when I say women, I also mean children, young girls of all ages. So I grew up in North Belfast, and I'm still here. I haven't moved too far. And I grew up with domestic violence, so I witnessed and experienced domestic violence firsthand growing up. And I think that's why I sort of went towards the work in regards to advocating and supporting women who had suffered domestic violence, and especially children, because I knew what that was like. I knew what that experience was like for me and my brothers, my four siblings. So I think that was in the background of where my choices of work led me. So I've worked for Women's Aid for just over 20 years. And before that, I worked in the community as a family support worker. So I would have been there to support families who were going through some kind of crisis or needed some extra support. It could have looked like maybe there was child protection issues, or it was prevention of child protection issues actually happening. So I learned a lot about being in other people's homes and trying to build up that rapport, especially when you're an invited guest into someone's home. So I learned very quickly to appreciate that I was a visitor, and how, as a visitor or a professional, how I could bridge that gap between, are you statutory? Are you going to make my life worse? So I was able to manage to do that with, I suppose, the knowledge of my own childhood. A lot of the cases that I went out to support would have entailed domestic violence. That would have been on the case conference table. So that was difficult in a way for me because I never talked about it. I didn't talk to colleagues about it at the time. Certainly didn't speak to the women or the fathers and mothers that I was working with. I didn't never say, oh, I understand because, but it was sort of there. And then after a while working as a family support worker in the community, I decided I would like to go for an actual job doing that work directly with victims and survivors. So I worked in a refuge for 16 years, which was really interesting because every day it was different, obviously. So it was based in the centre of Belfast, and I would have worked with women from all over the world. Um, our refuge would have had 20 rooms, and there was one time where 16 of those were occupied with women whose language wasn't English, it wasn't their first language. I also worked with women who were trafficked for sexual exploitation and domestic servitude. And I also worked with women coming out of prison and women with mental health issues, addictions, and the whole impact of what domestic violence can do to a human being was presented through the door of the refuge over the 20 years or 16 years in the refuge, and the other 4 years was working with outreach. So people say, well, oh, that sounds sore. That sounds really hard work. And it was hard work, but I think because I was so focused in trying to do my best to support, I tried to learn as much as I could, not just academically, but also learn how to reach out to someone who is suffering without that power imbalance of, the social guardian and the victim. And I think living with those women and children, because that's what it was like. I was again in someone else's home, even though it was a refuge, there was 20 families there. I learned how to be able to build up rapport and have a relationship with those women who were there for support, so I could do the best that I could do to help
How
them
did you do that? How
heal.
did you build up the rapport with them?
I think humor a lot of the times. I know that might sound strange when you're greeting someone coming through the door whose life has turned upside down, and has lost their home, maybe their job, their status as a couple or a married couple, and the whole change that they have to go through. But I think I never took myself too seriously when it came to working directly with victims and survivors. And I think someone, I can't remember now where I read it, but it was really about taking the passenger seat, and the victim being in the driver's seat, and they have invited you there to support them. And you're never to say, look, I know a shorter route, I'll take the driver's seat. So I always knew that it was there, the focus was on what they wanted. So my job was to give them information and support. The support would have looked like things like going to the solicitors, going to the GP, going to court, going to the housing executive to try and get rehoused, going to new schools for their children, and being with them as opposed to speaking on behalf of. And I always felt I was at ease at knowing my role, and I think it worked really well because I built up good relationships with those women who were absolutely devastated because of the abuse and then the fact that they were now homeless. We also did some group work with them looking at about domestic abuse and how it impacted on them and their children. And there was a lot of fun in those groups, but there was a lot of tears as well. So I think humour, um, when it was appropriate, of course, I think that helped the rapport building, and people knew that they could come to me and speak to me about anything, and that I wasn't going to be too strict or too authoritarian, that I was someone who knew I could meet them where they were at. Uh,
And
what
did
I
this,
did,
sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here again. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Did this help with your journey to healing, doing these workshops with these women, if you didn't address it yourself straight on?
Mhm, yeah, yeah. As I said earlier, in the previous job working in the community, I didn't talk to anyone about this. But I put myself in a position where I was surrounded by information, statistics, learning, the training that I was given. I couldn't ignore it. So I did seek some counselling support for that, only so that I could be a better support to the people that I was there to serve, as opposed to the pain of the journey that I had been through. But indirectly, that's where my healing happened, if you
Mm.
get me. So I went to it because not that I was breaking down in front of people or that I was carrying a lot of things home, because I understood about boundaries and I was getting regular supervision. I felt that I needed to look at this so that I could be a better person, also to get rid of maybe some of the pain, a lot of the pain, and the confusion of a child growing up with domestic violence coming into my adulthood, and that may have blurred my, I suppose my attitude towards perpetrators in particular, because women would cry because they missed their partners, they missed their husbands, they missed the father of their children. And I needed to understand about that loss. I needed to understand about forgiveness. I needed for my own father. So it was really useful for me. I sort of
So,
threw myself in the lion's den as regards to my own recovery from suffering domestic violence, I suppose, by actually living and breathing and learning about it on the job itself, if you understand.
yeah, no, I do understand. And obviously your father was the person who did the domestic violence. Is he still alive? Is he still around? And
Yes.
you, like your relationship with him after working with forgiveness work, did it help your relationship with him, or is he cut from your life now?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, so my mother, if I have to mention her first. She passed away 5 years ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. She was able to leave. She left. She met him when she was married when she was 21. So she actually left him when she was 60. And she had 15 wonderful years of being free to
Oh,
choose
that
what she
sends
wanted to do.
goosebumps down me for that. I'm so happy to hear that for her. That's
She
really
really had
lovely.
so much fun. And I supported her in that, and I enjoyed every second of watching her. She was so full of life, honestly. If she hadn't have had that experience, she'd probably been a poet, or she was amazing. And poetry she used to help her as well. So father then, um, he pushed everyone away, especially me. I'm the eldest of five, so I'm the only girl. So if I wasn't for him, I was against him. So he pushed me away because I helped to take his wife away from him. And so I had no choice in that. It wasn't like I wasn't going to have anything to do with him. Although I did try still to reach out like Christmas and different things like that. But when he'll be 80 years old this August. But he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when he was 68. So he was living on his own, obviously, because mummy had left, mummy had passed away, and now he's very frail and he's quite ill. And he's in a nursing home because he needs 24-hour nursing. But what's interesting is that I'm the only one that actually goes to see him. I'm his care buddy. I'm the contact. I'm the one with the empowering. What do you call that when you enduring power of attorney?
Yeah,
Can't remember the actual term.
I
So
know.
I'm the one that all the medical people will contact. And it wasn't it wasn't like I had to think about it because he was suffering. He's a human being. I never was hungry. You know, I look at the positive, and now I look at him, and it's so sad. But before he went downhill to the point where he's now not able to speak so much, there was a stage 4 years into the Alzheimer's that he was starting to speak about his own childhood, which I never knew about. So all those barriers and that aggression and everything, the wall that he had built, the Alzheimer's was starting to break that down, where he was talking to me about things that happened to him when he was young and the abuse that he had suffered and the neglect and everything else. So that was difficult for me to hear and also helped me understand where he was coming from. Not that I forgive what he has done, but I could see a human being who was broken, and his choice of how to deal with that was to bully and to instill fear on our mother and us. So I weirdly have this opportunity this last few years to be able to hold his hand, to stroke his face, to tell him that I love him, where I could never have done that before when he didn't have the Alzheimer's. So it's just come full circle. So I don't feel as angry. I don't, the forgiveness is for me, and he doesn't know that I even forgive him. And I believe he doesn't need to know that even if he hadn't Alzheimer's. So it's been a journey of understanding, compassion, and forgiveness. So
That's very
I,
powerful what you said there. The forgiveness is for me because in this situation, it is about you, not him.
yes.
Mm.
And I suppose the way that I show forgiveness is that I turn up. I will go. I will look after him as much as I can. Um, and I keep the rest of the boys in up to date with what's going on. And they have their reasons, and I don't push it, and I don't, you know, that's their journey that they need to go, and I'll support them. I'll support them through that if that's what they want. But they're all dealing with it in their own way. But it was funny. My mum, when she left him, she used to say things like, see when he goes, because she always thought he'd go before her. See when he goes, just put him in one of them funeral parlors. She like, don't be. Our culture here would be that you would keep someone in a way, you would wake them for 3 days, and they would be in your house, usually under the bay window. And I should go, don't, because nobody likes him. And I mean, don't be sitting up all night and 3 nights for him. And I would be like, Even this was 10 years ago. And I'd be like, no, mum, he's my dad, and he'll go into my bay window the same way you'll go into my bay window. Okay, well, I'll sit with you for one night, but I'll not be sitting for 3 nights. So she used to make me laugh because she would say things like that, and that was 10 years ago. So I knew I was okay with it. It was like a thing that you know that is right, even though there's a bit of conflict about it. And I could easily have went with her and went, yeah, you're right, mum. Like what he did to you and what he did but I even knew then, as much as I supported her, I did have to be honest and say, no, mum, he's my dad, and that's what I'm going to do. All right then, she said. I'll sit with you for one night. So,
I
so
love that she said that she
did that.
supported you.
Oh,
And she probably would have sat with you for the 3 nights.
oh, she would have.
Yeah,
She would have. She would have. It was like, yeah, she's so much anger still left, but she used it in a way. She was very humorous. She used it in a great way and was well loved by not just family, but lots and lots of friends. She was so funny.
because it
So,
takes a lot of courage to leave your relationship. It really does. Huge courage to
yeah.
actually go. Like my older kids, I'm separated from their dad, and I know, and I wasn't in an abusive relationship, and there was no, dodgy dealings in the relationship. It just the two of us didn't get on, and so I made the decision to leave. There's lots of reasons for behind it, but and that would have been, so there wasn't any hurt. Well, there was hurt, but you know what, there was no betrayal or betrayal of trust of,
Mm,
of an affair or something.
yeah.
But the courage to do that is immense. So it's a very hard thing to do. What your mom did, I have huge respect for, because it takes an awful lot of courage, especially when she'd been in a
It
relationship
does.
since she was
Yeah.
21. It's nearly, I don't know, really bad at maths, 40 years. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
just under, obviously, and she met him before they married. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. She
and
met him when
and the
she was
stigma
19.
that goes with breakup in a relationship
Mm,
is a bit more acceptable now. But for your mum's age as well,
yeah.
it's not easy.
But if you think about it, any breakup is very difficult, especially if there's children involved, although we
Incredibly.
were all fully grown at that stage. And but if you put the added barrier, obstacles of having suffered emotional and physical abuse for the entire 40 years, you're not the same person. You don't have the same resources or possibly resilience, or maybe you do have absolutely 100% resilience because you're still alive and you have lived through it. But for women, you know, who are of the who are older and suffer domestic violence, I mean, 1 in 4 women in UK will suffer domestic or sexual violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3 women globally. That's a lot of women.
That is
Okay.
a lot of women.
We also understand that men suffer domestic violence, and that's coming out more and more now. But
Mhm.
I can only speak on my experience of my mother and also my 20 years working with female victims. So out of the 1 in 4 in the UK, 1 in 10 of them will be a woman who's over 55 years of age, and that's where the research is done, where they consider that to be women in the second stage of life or older women. So the obstacles they have will be that they will have had a longer time of that domestic terrorism, which is really what we're talking about. Coercive control, gaslighting, all the things where you're made to believe that what you're thinking and saying is wrong, and you're isolated away from family and friends so that you can check in with people. So this is a drip, drip, drip that goes on over a period of time. So on my mother's behalf, she didn't feel confident about anything, because if you're told every day you can't count up properly, or you can't budget right, or you can't do this and you can't do that, that if you consider a piece of paper that is a human being, that's stripping pieces of that away until what I saw my mother as when I said, let's go, you can come stay with me until you can get your own place, was this. So that's meant to be an A4 human being piece of paper. And if you have someone who is emotionally, mentally drained, and never mind the shame and all the rest of it, and the whole having to change everything and move, we as a society are asking this that's left of that person to make all these big decisions and to do all of those things. You know what moving house is like. It's one of the top three stressors. But when you're moving because you have to or you have to escape, it's a different thing altogether. So the
Oh,
stress,
it is
you know,
hugely
and
stressful.
bringing in after going to your seminar last night, which was fantastic, and listening to the impact of stress on a human being, then look at a stress on a female, then look at stress on a female going through either perimenopause or menopause. All of those things will impact. So it was especially wonderful that at 60, when she was still actually going through symptoms of the menopause, that she was able to still take my hand and say, okay, I need your support. I need to do this, because she was actually suicidal at times. She was able to talk to me and tell me she was actually suicidal at times because of the abuse. And also, I had no idea really about the impact of the menopause until I now am going through it myself. But thinking back about those years up to, say, from 50 onwards, where things were really heating up, and he was becoming more and more controlling and still trying to threaten and use violence. He didn't use violence, physical violence, as much the latter years, but he would have, and the fear of that was still with her. So, for example, he would have beaten her up. He broke her front teeth when she was younger. Even at 60, if he had lifted his hand like this or went to scratch his head, she'd have cowered away. So she had to deal with all of that, plus go through the natural process of womanhood, which is the menopause. But it made me think, after listening to you last night, about my own mother and all the extra things that she had to deal with, which would exacerbate any symptoms that she may have had in the menopause. When I thought that was interesting um, to consider. So with all of that, and as I said, people say to you, well, that's really difficult work what you're doing. How did I deal with it other than going to counseling for a year or so? I also had a hobby of drama. So my creative side and being able to use that and have that opportunity was a great joy for me and an escape. So Silver Sister Productions then is the knowledge and the experience of working in the domestic violence field, and also having the drama side. So Silver Sister Productions was born out of those two passions. So not only do I educate, raise awareness and speak, I do conferences and presentations and all of those things, but I also bring in drama. So I write my own pieces and I perform them. There's small vignettes that are about 15, 20 minutes, and my workshops include that piece, growing old with domestic violence. So my mummy's in the story along with all the other women that I have met. So growing old with domestic violence starts at the beginning, and I did start it in 1963 because that's when she got married, and she's and ironing her shirt, and she's singing Dusty Springfield. I don't know what it is that makes me love you so, but the line in the song really struck me, because I was just thinking, what song was around then? What song did my mummy used to sing? So what do you hear? So I don't know what it is that makes me love you so. I only know I never want to let you go. 'Cause you started something, can't you see? That ever since that day you've had a hold on me. And that's the line that grabbed me, because she was full of joy. She was only a year married. She was ironing his shirt. They were going out. And then when we go through the whole process to the end, when she's 70 and she didn't get away, she sings the song again, only as an older woman, and her voice is dry, and it's their 50th anniversary. And she says, "You've had a hold on me," and the anniversary card that it's not opened falls. Now, there's lots of more. There's lots in the middle.
You make me cry now. Oh no,
Yeah.
it's very powerful, and it's
So
also
drama does that.
needed. Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
because
would, yeah.
I think it's a release, isn't it, for women, that they can shed those tears while watching that, and it lets out that emotion, because I think it's the shame of that you've got yourself into this situation. And as you said, the more you get stripped away, the less you can get out of it.
Mm.
And then shame comes in again, and you don't want to discuss it with anybody. You could, because of the shame. It's terrible. It's heartbreaking to think. But if you, I know the power I got back in my life when I left my ex-partner was immense. And I do understand that. And um, and it is difficult when you're in a abusive
Yeah,
relationship. It is
yeah.
difficult.
And shame and guilt they're very close cousins, you know.
Oh,
The
terrible.
guilt, if you feel guilty because you've been told it's your fault, you're not a good enough mother, you're not a good enough woman, you're not this, you do start to believe it when you don't have any other networks or
Absolutely.
anyone to talk to. You start to believe it, and even if you do fight it in your head and go, "I'm not, I'm not, I'm not," those blows to your solar plexus and where your emotional brain sits does bruise, and it does then filter. Especially when you, all of us go through this. We all at times our self esteem will be up and down the same way as our mental health will be up and down. But to have that all of the time, that drip, drip, drip. So you're not going to go around telling people if you're feeling guilty and shameful, not just because you couldn't make it work, or I mean a deeper sense within your being that you are not good enough, and almost like this is my fault, and I have made my bed and I am not lying in it. But the drama piece is only one part of the workshop, so I don't. I always worry that I don't want to sensationalize any of this. So I invite the audience to look at my character in that. I just call her Helen. And I'll ask at each stage, because I do three different chairs to show three different stages of her time living with the abusive partner. And I'll ask, what do you think would have helped? I ask the audience. So I use it as almost like a forum theatre where people can say, well, see, when she went to see the psychiatrist in her 30s and her 40s, could you not have, told the psychiatrist? So I'll react. I'll say, well, what would you have said? So I will do that there and then. I'll go back into that and say, okay, I'm sitting with the
That's
psychiatrist. What will I do?
incredibly powerful to do that.
I love doing this. I know these women so well. I feel almost like I'm her. So I know that I can do that. I can improvise on the spot and give an authentic response from someone who knows. As a child, I mean, I haven't suffered domestic violence in a relationship. Um, I met my husband when I was 14 and we're still together. So,
I'm really glad to hear that. I wanted to ask you
no,
that question, but I'm glad that you brought it up, because I think that gives hope to women out there that they can meet the person that they
mm,
do fall in love with. And I was fortunate I met someone else as well. And we have a little girl as well. So, I'm very lucky, and she's like a little beautiful blessing in our lives. But yeah, so I think it's important to know that you can meet somebody that's good and isn't violent or abusive
yes. So,
physically,
so
verbally.
he is the opposite to my father.
And
And I
if
knew it when I met him when I was 14 and a half. And we grew up together and I knew he's not, he's not like him. He's not this, tick, tick, tick. Even though I didn't get a sheet of paper, I tick. But, yes, and we have two grown-up children, a 30-year-old son and a 25-year-old daughter. And we're both very proud of being able to nurture well enough, good enough, as Melanie Klein phrased the child theorist. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember, but
that's okay.
she coined the phrase "good enough mother," and it's nice to know that they're well balanced ish. Coming from me, they're well balanced enough, and to me, that is breaking the cycle.
I was about
That's breaking the cycle, and I want to help other people break the cycle. And I also want to understand why people abuse, and in particular men abuse, and I still haven't got the answer. And when I go to different conferences and webinars, and the last thing is always because people who have been hurt in childhood, who grow up with this and don't look at it and have some support with it, will choose to do that. We can't keep,
Do
pardon
you
the phrase,
think
but they fuck you up. Your mum and dad, the poem starts off with, you can bleep that out if you like, but that's the actual line in the poem. They fuck you up your mum and dad. So we can't always keep blaming.
I know.
because I don't want my kids blaming me. So we have to be the best people we can be for our kids, as hard as it is, but it's the best thing because it does make you a better person.
It's very interesting. I listen to, again, like you, I'm always listening to webinars and talks and constantly learning because I'm fascinated, curious about everything and learning that kids that are abused or, or in an abusive relationship in throughout their lives, it actually stops a part of their brain developing. So they don't develop the I'm probably saying this a little bit wrong, but the sympathy section of it, empathy. They don't
Empathy,
develop empathy.
frontal cortex between the age of 0
Yeah,
and 2.
yeah. They don't they don't develop that empathy. So it's not there because they've never been taught it. It's almost like a baby, when the baby's first born, it really looks to the mother and father to be held and hugged and nurtured up along. But if you don't show that nurture, if you don't teach the baby or your little child toddler this, it doesn't develop in them. And that's another theory that they have, why people that are abused become abusers. It's
Yes, I hear that, and I went to Derry a few years ago and heard someone speak about that, and they used scans of children's brains in the Bosnian War. So in war where there's any kind of conflict, and then likened that to maybe a child growing up with domestic violence. So, the carer, the smiley carer face also is the aggressor and the one who makes you feel afraid. On paper, yes. However, children also could have a sibling, an older sibling, who's there to support them, to sing to them when there's noise downstairs of screaming,
yeah.
a screaming mother. Hello, that's what I did with my brothers. I had people that I could speak to, my cousins, and I just had a way of being playful. And I actually, you would never have thought as a child that I was suffering from anything at all. I would have used the whole, I'm going to do well in school, I'm going to be funny, I'm going to be liked. And it was exhausting because I was so sad and so afraid. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the outcome's going to be. That is the potential if a child doesn't have someone else. So Helping Hands is a program that they would have done in Women's Aid to teach children protective behaviours, not necessarily talking to them about domestic violence, but primary school children. And if you have your feelings in your tummy, who can you talk to? And children would have said their dog or their doll or their teddy or a youth leader or someone in the church. If it was the mother and father, if it was trouble at home, there was issues with aggression towards a child from parents. So if children have the opportunity to be able to talk and be seen and get support, then that doesn't necessarily have to happen. Where all of those development, I think it's, the cortisone and adrenaline, all those things interrupt those natural connections for the frontal lobe. As far as I know, I'm no expert,
No,
but my understanding is that actually, if you take a photograph of that there actually could be an empty space. But as you know, the brain is really good. So if you have some kind of brain injury, there's all these other connections that can happen. And the good news is, at around adolescence, when everything is all getting wired up again, there is a window of opportunity for that child to also heal and for connections to happen. So they won't have that empty space as much as it was.
wow, I didn't know that. That is an amazing piece of information to know,
I
actually.
hope it's right, but that's what I remember. And when people are always hearing what I'm saying, they're like, "Oh, it's so awful. What about the children?" I suspect there's hope for children, even in the midst of that, in the midst of war, in the midst of domestic war. There's ways that children will find to connect and feel safe.
Mm.
And we just have to, first of all, recognize that they're not just witnesses of domestic abuse, they actually do experience it, and that there's a change now in the language around that. But so I love what I do. I am always looking for opportunities to raise awareness and to use interactive drama and creative writing and all of those things, because that's the two things that I feel passionate about, and that's the two things that I'm actually good at. And that's another way of using that rapport I talked about when working with victims and survivors, of also inviting and facilitating space for an audience, both men and women, to be able to ask those questions or speak up. And I just think I have a knack for it, Lucy.
You do. You actually do. Absolutely. And it's very interesting. As you know, my background is Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
And when you say that drama and it really, and curiosity and, learning really comes down to your root foundation, which is your kidney energy. So you're feeding that really powerfully with what you do.
Oh, tell me more. My kidney.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, kidney and adrenal. It really comes we kill our curiosity as we grow up, and I suppose no, I'm not a victim of childhood abuse, but there are, you've survived this, but it's your humor, your curiosity as a child, your playfulness that
mm,
that helped you through
yeah,
this process.
yeah,
And that comes from your root foundation, which is your kidney energy in Chinese medicine, and you're still feeding it.
yeah,
And it's very interesting. Again, it's something menopausal women suffer with. So if they don't feed that
yeah,
uh, curiosity in them, it can deplete that energy as well. And it's such a simple thing to do. It's like going out in the garden and smelling the flowers. Do you know, it's
yeah.
something
Or standing in the rain and not rushing, going, ah, wonderful.
exactly hugging a
Yeah.
tree, that type of
Oh,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
That's,
Jumping in the sea,
yeah, jumping, anything like that, feeling
even the
taking,
Irish Sea. It's
yeah,
freezing.
yeah, doesn't matter, but running barefoot on the sand,
Yeah,
walking grass without your shoes on, all of those things that, they create the curiosity in your life again, and it helps to support your kidney. So you've been doing that incredibly well
yeah.
throughout your
I
life.
particularly like I particularly like rolling down hills,
There we go.
but it's sore in the old hip now.
It's when I get up because Amber makes me do
It's trying to get back up.
when I get up and she thinks it's hilarious because I'm so dizzy. I have to go, I'm gonna lie here now for a few seconds.
Yes.
Make
Just to check what's broken and what isn't.
sure I get up with my feet, not my head. Listen, thank you so much. You've been an amazing guest. And if
Thank
anybody would
you.
like to attend your workshops, how can they do that?
Well, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and my website is www.silversisterproductions.org.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I will add as well in the notes at the end, if anybody wants to get my Menopause Made Easy free ebook, it's going to be right there in the links as well to join. Okay, thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you, thank
good.
you.